And to the rest of you, thank you so much for being here for our Acts series. We have not named it yet, but what we've been covering in Acts chapter 13 and Acts chapter 14 is actually the first missionary journey of the Apostle Paul. There are going to be 3 journeys of the Apostle Paul chronicled for us in the book of Acts, and by the end of chapter 14, this first trip will take Paul and Barnabas back to where they began, which is Antioch in Syria. Here's a picture. I don't know if it'll help or not, but from Antioch, they sail to Cyprus, the island. They go through Perga. They go up to Galatia. They end up in Antioch and Pisidia, very different Antioch from the one they started at. And they hang out in the majority of their time. They spend in Galatia. And then they go back the way they came to Antioch. And probably the best thing for you to see is that all of that travel there through the Mediterranean Sea and all those places are compressed into chapters 13 and 14. And so we probably have 3 years of time, right? And in that 3 years of time, Paul and Barnabas established at least a half a dozen churches, and yet in chapters 13 and 14, we just have 1,855 words about the whole thing. But Luke gives us what we need. As they travel, Paul and Barnabas developed this pattern. It's a strategy for sharing the story of Jesus. He and Barnabas were Jewish, and so whenever they would roll into a new place, they would find the local Jewish synagogue, which was kind of a church for Jewish people, and they would go and they would start from the Old Testament scriptures that all of the Jewish people had in common, and they would use those scriptures to point to what the prophets said about the Messiah that they all believed in. And then they would show everyone why Jesus was the only and obvious fulfillment of all of those things that the prophets had said. And people would then believe in Jesus, and they would begin to follow him. And you get a few people together, and all of a sudden a church is born. We could say it this way, that Paul's go-to strategy was to find people who already knew and who already believed the Bible and show them that the scripture in the Bible pointed to Jesus. And that worked until Acts chapter 14. Paul and Barnabas find themselves in a place called Lystra. And apparently there's no Jewish synagogue there. And so what now? Well, typically in cities like this, there were wide open spaces in and around the gates of the city. And so the gates became a gathering place for people. It's probable that merchants would set up shop at the city gates. And since the people were there, that's where Paul went. In verse 13, it actually mentions the city gates and kind of indicates to us that this was where Paul was preaching. There's just one problem in preaching to these people. These people around Lystra's city gates aren't Jewish. They have not read the prophets. They have not learned about God's promise of the Messiah. Actually, they don't even worship God. They worship many gods. We could say it this way. They don't follow God, and they don't know the Bible. And so what we have here in Lystra is the very first time that Christians speak exclusively to people who don't believe in the Bible. They don't believe in the God of the Bible at all. And here's the question. How in the world do you share the message of God sending his son, the Messiah, into the world when people don't even believe in the God you're talking about or his Messiah? What do you do? Paul's message here is pretty brief. We just read it. We could argue that it's even cut off. I think there are things Paul wanted to say, but he didn't get to, because by the end he's talking to a mob. But even so, I think that we can see in what Paul does here a strategy to take the message of Jesus even to people who have no history with God or with the Bible or with church. Here's what I want you to see. I want you to watch here Paul restore a person, challenge a promise, realign a plot, and endure a pain. That's the whole story that we just read. First, I want you to watch Paul restore a person. In the very beginning of the story, Paul is at the city gates. He's speaking to whoever will listen at in front of him, and maybe it's day after day that he keeps going and preaching there. And in front of him on a lot of those days is a man who is lame. Now, Luke, who is the writer of Acts, is also a doctor, and he gives us here the medical explanation of this man's condition. He didn't have enough strength in his feet to walk, and he had been this way since he was born, since from birth. By the way, if that gives you a flashback, it probably should, because way back in chapter 3, it was Peter and John who went to pray, and they met a lame man on the way, and that lame man's condition was exactly the same as this man's. They were both lame from birth. They've never walked in their life. They cannot even stand, and so this man can't walk, but he can hear, and he's listening, and he's kind of picking up what Paul is laying down, and he listens about Jesus, and he begins to long to be whole, to be saved. That's the word. He wants that. And when Paul sees that he begins to have faith, Paul reaches out and he heals the man. He says this, "Stand up, get on your feet." Now you say that to a lame man in any other context, and that would be a cruel thing to say. But here, the healing power of God flows through Paul, and all of a sudden, the man springs up. It means he leaps up like he was a gymnast or something, and he begins walking. He's never walked before a minute in his life, but instantly, it's as if he'd been walking his whole life. And I just want to point to the idea here that Paul doesn't just preach, he also heals. He heals. This isn't just Paul saying words. This is Paul moving to action. And Jesus did that too. Jesus preached. His words were so powerful that they are still being dissected. They're still being parsed and debated. Even today, we still expound on them. But Jesus didn't stop with his words. He also healed. He used his hands. He cured the sick. He restored sight to the blind. He raised the dead. Why did he do that? Because one feeds the other. When people saw his deeds, then they listened to his words. When they saw the miracles Jesus did, they listened to what he said. And his followers run the same play. In Acts chapter 3, Peter and John go to pray and they heal a lame man on the way. They do a miracle and people see that miracle and then they listen to what they have to say. Philip goes to Samaria in Acts chapter 8 and he heals and he casts out demons, and then the people see that and then they listen to his words. And here Paul does the exact same thing because the play works. He heals a man and now he has the attention of everyone at the gates and they listen. And that old successful play is still our play to run. We speak about Jesus. That's our job, right? It's to tell about Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who came into the world to pour out his life and save us from sin and death. But that's not all we do. We don't just speak about it. Then we do. We act. And what do? We personify the gospel by living it. We pour ourselves out for the needs of others. We could say it this way. We tell the love of Jesus, and then we go live the love of Jesus. And living the love of Jesus just looks like this. Whoever is in front of me, wherever it is, whenever it is, I just ask, what can I do right now to make this person's life better? And whatever the answer is to that question, I do that. I do that. And you might get stuck here, and you might think, well, hold on. Paul did a miracle. I can't do a miracle. Like, Paul healed a guy. I can't do that. Don't get distracted by that. What can you do? Can you hold a door? Can you sweep a floor? Can you carry bags of groceries? Can you fix a plumbing problem? Can you mow a lawn? Can you listen to someone who just needs listened to? Can you pray? Can you teach? Can you give? What can you do? Because you can do something. See, when we're in the middle of a sea of people who don't know the golden rule, and then they see us living it out, then they don't need to read about it. When they see us pouring ourselves out to restore the people around us and giving our time and treasures away to do it, it will seem like a miracle to them, and it is a miracle. It's the miracle of God's love being passed to others. Here's what I want you to see. I want you to watch Paul challenge a promise. When people see this miracle, they go into a frenzy. They start talking about Paul and Barnabas, and they start telling everybody that these two must be gods. They begin to call Barnabas Zeus. They call Paul Hermes because he was the speaker of the two, and Hermes was the messenger of all of the gods in Greek mythology. And so Paul challenges that assertion right away. He says, no, you've got this wrong. We are not gods. We're just men. We're human beings just like you. And even though that's a challenge, it's not the challenge I want you to see. It's this. It's where Paul says, we bring you good news. Good news. And the good news he tells them is of the one true God. He says, this one true God that I'm bringing to you today is a living God. He's good and he's kind, and he proves that by giving us what we need to live and to survive. You've had rain, right? You've had crops that produce fruit and produce from the rain, and you enjoyed all of that provision. You probably had some block parties. You probably had some backyard barbecues, and maybe even the occasional potluck where everybody brought food and shared the food that he gave. Yeah, right? He says every time you had friends and family who gathered around food and you enjoyed it and you just got swallowed up in the gladness that you were experiencing, it was because this living God is a giving God. And finally, this one true living and giving God is also a forgiving God. Now, I have to be honest with you, that part really isn't in there. There's such an excited misunderstanding of who they think Paul and Barnabas to be that Paul never makes it that far in his message. But surely his next line, his next words would have been about the forgiveness that this God gives to everyone. And in that little sermon outline, we get to see how to show God to people when they don't believe that there is a law that they need to keep. They don't believe in heaven. They don't believe in hell, or even if there even really is ever a reason for them to feel guilty. Paul never uses the word sin here. You use the word sin with church people because church people understand sin. The men who went to the conference this weekend, that's what it was about. It was all about being dead to sin and alive to Christ. We believe in a law that God laid down and that we just trampled right over. We get sin. But not these people. They don't know. Sin is not a concept for them, but worship is. They worship mythological gods like Zeus and Hermes. And this is what Paul challenges. He says, we bring you good news. Good news always has something to do with being rescued from something that is weighing you down. Maybe you walk into your living room and your spouse says, good news. And you say, what? And they say, that bill we thought we owed, it was a mistake. It got canceled. Woohoo! Right? That's good news. Good news is always about being liberated from something. Paul is trying to liberate these people from what? We bring you good news. The answer is from the vain things that they were putting in place of the one true God. Vain things means empty, means defective, it means ineffective, it means worthless. There are things in this life that make promises to you and me, but those things never live up to their promises. They leave us empty in the end. And so I can imagine Paul standing at the gates and pointing to some soldiers. Soldiers, what God do you worship? We worship the God of war. And Paul asks, how's that going for you? Have all the wars ended yet? Everyone would have laughed at that, right? He points to some business people out in the crowd. What God do you worship? The God of commerce. Great. How's that going for you? Has everything turned to gold yet? No? People out in the crowd seeking love. What God do you worship? We worship the goddess of love. Awesome. Evaluate your closest relationship. Is it just unending, uninterrupted love? It's not? Huh. Even Caesar was a god to these people. I can imagine Paul challenging that. How's that going for you? Have all your dreams come true from worshiping Caesar? Paul is challenging these things these people have put their hope in, the things that they've put on a pedestal to give them meaning in life. And all of these things, they're vain, they're worthless, they're dead. They can't ever give you life like the one true, living, giving, and forgiving God can. And we in this room, we read that text and we nod in approval at Paul's words. We say, oh my goodness, I'm so glad that I don't worship mythological cartoon gods like these people did. Like, how obvious is it that this is a dead end? I mean, these people must be turnips, right? I'm not a turnip. I worship a real God. You came to the church today for truth, and here it is. Every one of us has something that is our meaning in this life. Every one of us has something that we've put at the center, and we are living for that thing. Every one of us is sacrificing for something. And whatever it is, how's that going for you? Whatever it is, it controls you. Maybe you need security to have meaning in your life. Then security will own you whenever you chase after it, because all of your choices will have been made for you. Same with love. If someone's love is the only thing that will give you meaning and hope in this life, then you will then be controlled by the people whose love that you're chasing. Money, same song, different dance. If that's where you put your trust, then you will be controlled by it, because you will have to do whatever it takes to get it, and you will have to do whatever it takes to keep it. You are always mastered by what you live for. And these people say, we're living for Zeus, we're living for Hermes. And we in this room say, whether if we would admit it, we're saying, I'm living for approval, I'm living for acceptance. And Paul says, those things can never give you what they've promised. They're dead. They're worthless gods. But my God, the true God, is the only God who, when you begin to serve him, can liberate you. Every other God takes more than it gives. But this God, the true God, when you turn to him, will satisfy you completely. He'll fill your heart with joy and with gladness. He'll give you life, because gods can only give you what they are. All the other gods are dead. So what do they give? They give you death. This God is alive, so he can give you life. And even if you fail him, and this is the part I think Paul doesn't get to preach, even when you fail this God, he will forgive you. The God you're worshiping now, will that do? Will it do that? Will your career forgive you if you're worshiping your career? Your retirement account, if you're worshiping that, will it forgive you? Will the possessions that you've tried to accumulate in your life, will they forgive you? If you live for those things and you fall short of the goals that you have for those things, then those things will never let you forget it. The rest of your life, you'll hate yourself if that's where your meaning is coming from. But this God became like us and gave himself so that we could be right, even when we fall short. This God is the only master you'll ever have, who willingly became a servant for you. He served you. He died for you so that you could be forgiven. And when you do fail him, he will forgive you. Now, in that, do you see what Paul is doing? How do we talk to people when they say, I don't need Jesus? Why would I ever need Jesus? Good grief. Who needs Jesus in their life? Here's the answer. Because you're living for something. Every one of us is living for something. Everyone has a master. And the question is, what kind of master do you have? And unless the master is the one who became the servant, then that thing you're building your life around is actually a slave driver. Don't you want to be free and not a slave? See Paul here endure a pain. And I'm really actually going to skip this one. You can come to my sermon class and and talk about this. But at the very end of the story, did you notice that they stoned Paul? Paul gets stoned, right? And it's not that kind of stone. It's like with the rocks kind. It's way different than that. And then verse 20, they think he's dead. It just says he rose up alive. Why? Here's all I'll say about it. Because that's what the gospel is. The gospel is life out of death. And so Paul rises up. And then here's the end. Watch Paul realign the plot. You have to admit that although it's not without modern parallels, this business of people rushing up after the healing of this lame man and beginning to shout, the gods have come down to us in the likeness of men, that's kind of weird, right? What on earth would cause them to do this and to deify Paul and Barnabas and call them Zeus and Hermes? In Lystra's history, there was actually a story that was very common. It was told that Zeus and Hermes did actually come to visit their city one time. But Zeus and Hermes came in disguise. And they went around to houses and they went around knocking on doors looking for hospitality, but no one gave them hospitality. Door after door they would knock on, and door after door was shut in their face. And then finally they knocked on a door of an old elderly couple, Philemon and his wife Baucis. And Philemon and Baucis took Zeus and Hermes in, and the myth went this way, that when the gods came out of their house, they wiped the entire population of Lystra away so that Philemon and Baucis were the only ones left. And these two were made guardians of a great temple to the gods. And when they died, they were made into two giant, majestic trees. Wow, what a great reward for faithfulness that is, right? Here, be wood. Now, the Lystran people owned that story. They owned it. They said to each other, we always have to be looking out for the gods because they may visit us any time. Children were raised in this city with this idea. And here comes Paul into the city and he heals a lame man. It's a very godlike thing to do, don't you think? And it's game on for the people of Lystra. They don't want the same thing to happen again that happened before. And the reason they believed Paul and Barnabas to be gods was because of the stories that they told themselves. We have stories that we tell ourselves too. And I'm not being metaphorical here, trying to make a sermon point. I'm really talking about the stories that we actually tell each other, that we believe and that impact us down deep. J.R.R. Tolkien has an essay where he writes about the things that fascinate us as humans, and these are the things that make it always into the stories that we tell, because these are the things that we really do long for. There are four main things, and as I mentioned these four things, I want you to think about some of your favorite movies, some of your favorite books, some of your favorite stories, and see if these things aren't major themes that pop up over and over in those movies, in those stories. Here's number one. We want stories where we escape time and death. And so we love Back to the Future, right? We love that Doc Brown makes a time machine out of a DeLorean. We want Snow White, the real Snow White, not the new Snow White. Like, nobody likes that one. Why? Because there's no Prince Charming. That's what we want in the story. We want Prince Charming and his kiss to wake the dead. Here's number two. We want stories where humans interact with non-humans. And so E.T. is still compelling after 43 years. Yes, you are that old. We all still want to have a mentor like Yoda, right? And that one's even older, by the way. Here's number three. We want stories that tell us that once we've found true love, that we will never, ever, ever have to lose it. How many stories and books end with the two people in the movie that everybody knows should be together, but they're never together until the end, and they finally find that true love, and the movie closes with them walking in hand into the sunset. And the idea is now they've found true love, and they will never have to lose it. That's what we want. Here's number 4. We want stories that give us a complete triumph of good over evil. John McClane always has to throw Hans Gruber out the window at the end. Cousin Eddie always has to tie up Clark's boss for Christmas. Andy Dufresne always has to escape Shawshank Prison. And goodness, even if it's flawed goodness, is what we root for. Goodness has to win in the end. Now, it's fascinating then to think about why we want those elements in all of our story. And here's why Tolkien writes his whole essay that he writes. He says, we want those things in our stories because that is our story. It's a story we lost. And it's a story we want back. See, in the beginning, in Genesis, Adam and Eve, what did they do? They talked and they walked and they interacted with God himself, with a non-human. They talked to snakes. They probably talked to angels too. Who knows what else they talked to? In the beginning, those two in that perfect place, they did have a love where they were designed to live happily ever after, never having to say goodbye, ever. In that place, there was no death. They were meant to live, and they were meant to live forever. And in that place, there was only good. There was no evil to triumph over. Goodness won every moment. And the goodness was complete right down to the blades of grass. And deep down, we know that's our real story. It's the ultimate reality that we lost, and so we can't stop wanting it. We can't stop being fascinated that we lost it and what it might look like to have it back. The Lystrans were desperate to have gods come down to them in human form, and you and I are desperate for that too. We want that in every story that we love. It shows up there. And here's Paul and Barnabas with the claim, Jesus Christ is the God who did come down in human form. He didn't come down to trick us. He didn't come down to wipe us out. He came down to take us back. He came to tear down the wall that stood between us and this reality that we know is true, that we lost. He broke through death, and because he did, there will now come a day that we will talk to beings that are not human. There will now come a day, because Jesus died and rose again. There will now come a day when we will have love without end, happily ever after. There will now come a day when we will, because he walked out of the tomb, we will hop over death as if it's just a crack in the sidewalk. And there will come a day when we will see the ultimate defeat of all of sin and evil, and good will take its permanent place in the universe like it was always meant to be. That's our story. That's our true story. Why? Because it's true in Jesus, the God who has come down. Deny God all you want, but you still love the story. You still want all of the things in those stories to be true. And it's my great privilege as a Christian to show you why they are. Why wouldn't someone want the thing that promises them everything they've ever hoped for? Why wouldn't you want that? The gospel is that thing. People will listen. We just have to tell the story. God, I thank you that this story that we lost has been recovered. That the God who is a living God, a giving God, a forgiving God, that God has come down and reached out to us so that we might move from death to life. so that we might have the story back that we long for. God, we thank you for Jesus, who came down to us to give us life. And it's in his name we worship and we pray. And all the people said,